afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Are you intimidated in the back, Alan? Should I turn it down a notch? Okay, sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dana Lewis. I'm here with Sarah Hahn and Doug Kanter, and you are here for the panel/group discussion of We Are Not Waiting, how ePatients are taking medical devices and healthcare and over the world, but basically taking medical devices and healthcare to the next level. I just kind of want to set the tone for this discussion. I noticed the thread of this conversation happening yesterday during a lot of the main room sessions. People were talking about patient-centered design, designing with patients, not for patients, and that's really what we're talking about here. So we're going to talk a little bit and give a little bit of our background, our stories, and why we're sitting here in front of you, and then start a discussion, but then we'd love to open up to the room and to people on Twitter and have a conversation with the room, because I feel like this is a very important conversation for us to be having, and not just only on the Twitter stream, but also in person while we have the opportunity. So I'd love to start with just a quick background of why I'm here and why I instigated this panel. I have type 1 diabetes, and I moved from Alabama to Seattle 4 years ago by myself. And I also sleep through my continuous glucose monitor alarms, which can be dangerous, as you've heard people talk about. So what I wanted to do is find a way to get somebody, whether it's my family, now boyfriend, now fiance, to be able to hear the alarms for me. And if they could tell that I wasn't responding, be able to call and intervene and potentially save my life. But the continuous glucose monitoring device is just a single device. You can't really do anything with it. The FDA makes it, and the company makes it really hard to get your data off the device. You have to have a certain computer software, which I didn't even have to get retrospective data, and there was no way to get data in real time. So back in November, I ran into somebody named John Kostick, an amazing person who has a child with type 1 diabetes, and he reverse engineered a way to get the data off the CGM into the cloud. And that was like unlocking the gate, and we were able to do so many things with that. We were able to upload the data and then send it to whoever I wanted to see it. And then because I didn't want the person watching it to get an alarm every time I went 1 point high or low, we put snoozes on it. So I could snooze it and say, yeah, I see that I'm high or I see that I'm low. I'm taking action. It's fine. But if they would wake up at 4 a.m. and see that it's alarming constantly and I'm 40, really low, and I'm not taking action, they could choose to call me. If I didn't respond to the call, they could choose to drive down and check on me or call 911 or call my apartment manager. Luckily, that's never needed to happen. But if that needed to happen, that could do. And that's an amazing safety net. And that changed my quality of life significantly from me not being afraid to go to sleep at night. And that's something I would challenge you to think about. Everybody has their own challenges, but that's something you don't think about with type 1 diabetes. You might think about the needles, man, that's hard. It's hard to figure out what to eat. But think about being afraid to go to sleep at night and not knowing if you're going to wake up in the morning. And the fact that that's your greatest fear, and that's something that I wanted to share with people, but it's even hard to share it because then I know my mom's going to be watching these tweets, and she's seen this before, and it makes her really upset and my family upset at this idea that I have this fear to go to sleep at night. So that's why we do what we do, or at least why I do what I would do, and created this system called DIYPS, the system that I've talked about. And this is a screenshot that shows my data being processed in real time. And so not only does it amplify the audio alerts, but it also does predictive alerts. So if I go high or I'm projected to go high or low, it'll warn me and say, hey, pay attention. It'll also give me recommendations to say you can do this or that. Now, the FDA looks at this and calls it a class 3 medical device, of this thing that Scott and I have hacked in our free time. I look at this and call it an amazing life-saving intervention that is awesome, and I should be able to do and be able to share with other people. But we can't post this open source because it's a class 3 medical device, and that would be bad, and the FDA would come after us. So one of the things that we're doing is, what are the components that we can take from this and add to other things and make it available to more people, but then also have a conversation with the FDA about what can we do to get this out to people, because it is so important. And I think the big point I want to make is, yes, there will be something like this out there in the future. My CGM company is actually making this dock where you can put your CGM in, it will take the data and upload it. But that's not going to be out on the market for another 2 or more years. Think how many people might die overnight from a low blood sugar because they don't hear their alarms or somebody's not there to check on them in the next 2 years. So that is why we are not waiting, and that's the whole point of this. And I just wanted to say, for the really academic medical people, just some outcomes data right here. This is my estimated average glucose, so an average of my blood glucose numbers. When I first started, we started in November, you can see there's a steady drop and a sustained improvement of my average blood glucose, just having this awareness of my data pushed in real time. And this stops in April. I haven't updated the graph, but we've seen that sustained continuance of it. And this is another really cool graph. So not only is my blood sugar on average lower, but you would think, okay, is she having more lows instead of more highs? And is her quality of life that much better? So the bottom blue line is my estimated average glucose, a different display. The top green line is my time in range. So the time spent with good blood sugars between the lines between 70 and 150. So you can see that's constantly improving and heading towards 90%. So the number of times I don't have to worry or take action on my blood sugar is decreasing, which is really, really amazing. And it means that while I'm sitting here, I don't have to obsessively wonder what my blood sugar is doing. If I start to go high, if I start to go low, if I'm sleeping, any scenario like that, driving, exercising, it's going to ping me. So I don't have to spend my brain power doing that. I can live my life and be a person and not constantly be the person with diabetes and let that drive my lifestyle. So that's kind of why I'm here, why I'm passionate about it. And I want to challenge one of the big questions for us to think about today is, this is something we did in our free time, after our day jobs, nights and weekends, because we're passionate about it and we see the difference it makes. But what if healthcare providers, the medical industry, the device manufacturers partnered with us and gave us mentors, people to talk to, resources, financial resources to be able to do this, whatever we needed to do this? What if patients like us had those resources? How far could we go? Look what we did with no resources. What could we do? And that's kind of the question I want us to answer at the end as you walk out of this room, is think about, what could you do to help us? What could you do to help yourselves? And also, what can we do to change the dynamic so that this kind of story where we're hacking a device and, oh my gosh, there's that rogue patient over there, that's not a rogue thing to do. This is the normal thing to do, is to take our data and do something about it that's going to change our lives. With that, I would love to hand it up next to Sarah to share a little bit about her experience and why she's here and why she's not waiting to be involved.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm Sarah from Seattle, Washington. So I come from a little bit of a different background. I'm working with the Empower team, a post-discharge wound monitoring app, and our investigators are right there. And basically, they brought me on as a patient advisor, and it's been fantastic because I get to provide that patient perspective, right? And that's basically what they're doing. They're bringing me on the team to really make this app more centered around the patient, the person who's going to be using it. So yeah. Another thing that I was interested in talking about was the difference between chronic and acute. I feel like we do a lot of the device discussions around the chronic conditions, but I come from a acute situation. I had a surgical site infection after surgery, and the thing is, you go through that post-discharge period, and you just want to be done with it. You just want to get through it. And afterwards, even though I had an infection, I wasn't thinking, oh wow, now I need to go and change the system. And I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't found Dr. Heather Evans, who invited me to be patient advisor. And how can we encourage patients that have gone through these acute conditions, moved on with their life, to come and engage and help design these devices or do research to help people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. And Doug, I know you spoke on the stage and people have heard from you, but for the people who may not have heard you yesterday, give a little bit of your background and why you're here.
Sure. I'm Doug Kanter. I'm a type 1 diabetic for 28 years now. Use an insulin pump. I use a continuous glucose monitor, same one as Dana, I believe. And so yeah, I have a couple needles in my stomach. One of them transmits to here. And I started a project called Databetes a few years ago. I was really just frustrated with the current software. I think a lot of these devices are great. I think the data that they produce are great. Love my insulin pump. It's allowed me to do a lot of things that weren't possible before that. But you see how bad the software is, and it's just frustrating, especially because if it could just be a little bit better, you feel like you could do even more, and you could keep your control in an even better range. I think the We Are Not Waiting movement's really exciting for a couple of different reasons. I think in general, I think the spirit of it is very much the same as MedX, which is just a lot of people who want to be part of a change and are frustrated that this big system doesn't seem to listen to them and it's not responding quickly enough. You get diabetics together and they all start complaining about the same thing, and yet the device manufacturers always claim that it's the FDA's fault. It's going to take 3 years for new software, but if they had actually submitted it, it probably would have taken a year and been out by now. I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of also the spirit of what we're trying to do with our own control is that I think a lot of us already have pretty good control, and our doctors, when we go in to see them, they're like, yeah, you're doing pretty good, but I think we want to do even better. Especially, one of the biggest concerns about having diabetes is these long-term complications, and it's a huge list: heart disease, liver disease, kidney damage, blindness, all these things. And so if we can do better, why we should. And I think that's the spirit that got a lot of people started. Looking at all the hackers and all the software developers in the diabetes space right now, all the interesting work is being done either by patients or parents of patients. And I think that a lot of these big companies they've tried something and it hasn't worked. They've realized it's a hard design challenge, but they also realize they're probably not going to make that much money on it. And so it's just a low priority. And so, what's a low priority for them is a very high priority for us. And so it's been interesting to watch over these last couple of years as this progressed. And, Dana mentioned John Kostick, who's just a very concerned father and who knew how to hack something. And then I think it was huge that he decided to open source this or post it on GitHub and share it with everyone instead of trying to keep it to himself. And it's really on top of that all this other innovation is coming. And it's really at a point where no one really knows, I think. I think there's been a group that's formed called CGM in the Cloud, which is a Facebook group. Started in April, maybe or so, March, April. And it quickly just spiked. And I think it's over 10,000 users right now. And so it's just this clear signal that there's this huge demand for it. If you look through the comments, it's fascinating. And a lot of it's parents who are interested in remotely monitoring their kids. And as much as there's value in the numbers, it seems like one of the currents I see through a lot of discussion is the talk about peace of mind. They're just, their kids at a sleepover and they can look down at their Pebble watch and see what their kid's blood sugar is, and that's a huge relief to them. That's just one of the ways that I think it's great.
Yeah, and I think we had a conversation last night about this, which is, this is kind of a stepping stone. We're not saying that these kind of things are the ultimate solution, because the thing that's coming out from Dexcom will be great for a lot of the people, a lot of the parents in the CGM in the Cloud group when it's out. But as an interim, for the next 2 years, we have this thing we can use until this more permanent solution is out there. So a lot of these innovations, a lot of things that we're doing is kind of the stepping stone of what can we do now to solve the need now, and as well as design for the future. And I think that was a point somebody made on stage yesterday that I thought was really poignant, is what do we do for people now? What are the needs now with the devices that they have now to solve these needs so that we're not losing people and they can get there so they can use the technology in the future? And I think that's one of the critical things. I would love to get y'all's thoughts on, you made a great point, Doug, about, the organizations say, oh, it's going to take 3 years through the FDA, so we're just not going to do it. What can we do as patients? What do you think we can do with these organizations to get them to engage with us, to say, no, it's important to do it, let's do it, and to also just engage us on a regular basis, because I don't see that happening often. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is part of what's the most interesting thing to watch about the whole movement, is that it's at this point where it's sort of uncharted territory. Not only are you helping yourself and helping yourself have better blood sugar control, but it's become a way to advocate for faster movement with the FDA, and the FDA is struggling to come up with a solution that makes everybody happy. I mean, they've been at the same conference as us. They hear us. I think they are trying. They are trying to respond. They have the bureaucracy, but at the same time, patients want it faster. And I think putting that pressure on them has been effective. And there's a real dialogue happening now. There's still a lot of issues to be worked out, especially, you mentioned retrospective data. And they've talked about how retrospective data now isn't managed as it's been essentially deregulated. But they haven't specifically defined what retrospective data means for diabetes. And I think they have to do that, for all conditions. But so that there's both this advocacy and this short-term solution, I think, is great.
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting dynamic where there's also a conversation about, are we all patients? Maybe we're all patients, but our dynamic of experiences are different. And Sarah, you're a great example of this. Is I think Doug and I are very proactive because we've had diabetes for years and we know we want to innovate. But your example of, you had no idea that, or you maybe knew you were a patient, but you had no idea that you were going to get involved in this world. So what was your kind of reaction when they asked you to be involved? And what are your thoughts on what is the best way to ask somebody who's not necessarily involved? How do we engage more people who don't necessarily, consider themselves e-patients or somebody already in this space?
Well, a big thing for me was realizing that it was a problem, because when I was diagnosed with a surgical site infection, I thought it was more of something was wrong with me. Like I made a mistake or it was just an anomaly, but it happens a lot. And realizing that a lot of people do go through this and that I can actually do something to make a difference, that was the biggest thing for me, really. And also, I want to go to medical school, and so that was a really big motivation for me to get involved on a research team. But interestingly, it wasn't until after I joined the team and kind of learned about the problem that I realized surgical site infections post-discharge are serious, and it happens a lot more than we know. So it's hard, because if I wasn't involved in medicine at all, I don't know if I would have actually come back and did this. But I think the biggest thing is if a doctor or researcher approaches me, I first have to know that I can make a difference. I'm not just sitting there to be on a check on a list that says, yeah, we have patients on our team, look at us, that my input's going to be valued. And also knowing that I'm not alone. There are a lot of people who could actually benefit from my contributions, and that this is a real problem that I can address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And I love the idea of us not just being, check marks, but actively engaged. And your team's obviously a great example. And I'm so glad, they're here to participate in the conversation. I think, there's a lot of barriers that we all face in terms of getting involved. We run into organizations, we say it's the FDA. What do you think is like the most is a barrier that people don't think about, but that really prevents us from getting engaged? I don't know. Either of you can speak to that. I mean, what do people just not think about? What is actually like, the elephant in the room for a barrier?
The biggest thing for me was not feeling that anything I would say would be important, because in my mind, providers, researchers, administrators, they know what they're doing. They should, right? And so what can I possibly say as one patient to contribute, right? But going through the patient experience and having that firsthand, actually living through it, it's tremendous. And I didn't know that. So I think that was the biggest thing for me, realizing that my firsthand experience going through that whole process, it's actually something that the researchers don't know. Mm-hmm. And especially for a post-discharge situation where you're leaving the clinic and your provider has no idea kind of what's going on with you. So it's hard, because I do think we're still kind of in a semi-paternalistic culture. It's changing, but I think that really does promote that idea of patients are hands off, patients are just receiving from the system, and that's not okay.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I don't know if any of you guys heard Kevin Clausen speak yesterday on his panel, but he really surprised me, because I helped him with a project 2 years ago, totally forgot about it. It was one of the things where I went in kind of feeling like the token patient. Why am I really here? Why am I helping? Yeah, sure, I'll read your informed consent form and tell you what I think. Big whoop. Well, for him to speak on stage and say, you made this comment about patient first language and referring to people as people and not by one characteristic that we view them through, the fact that it stuck and it changed the way he did things for 2 years. That was incredibly validating for me as a patient who has been doing this and saying, well, what is the return on this? What is the value? Am I just, somebody on a checklist? Is incredible. So that feedback was great. And you're obviously getting that too. Doug, have you ever experienced that?
In terms of, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of the challenges that you're mentioning. In terms of moving these projects forward, I think we both started with these projects of N of 1, right? And so that just comes from a natural curiosity and wanting to do better. I think as we start to scale these up, we're going to realize how complicated all these diseases are. I mean, the number of times I've sat with diabetics and we talk about, oh, when I do this, this happens, and then someone else says it's the opposite. I think getting into that will be interesting. I think there's so much that can be done if people do self-track and keep track of all the variables that can influence your blood sugar control, but getting people to that stage is a huge challenge in itself, engaging patients and bringing that side of it in. All these patients in CGM in the cloud, and we're all very, very proactive as it is. And so designing a solution that will also work for different personality type, I think will be a challenge. But I think a lot of it's been started just because the technology has gotten simpler and easier, and that, you can get things into the cloud easier than it used to be. And so that's part of what's encouraging everyone.
Yeah, being, like I said, that John being able to share his uploader made it so we went from 1 or 2 people hacking on this and kind of spinning their wheels to having upwards of 50 developers on this project, which is really incredible for people all doing this in their free time. I did want to encourage you again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. We've got somebody with the mics. Looks like we have one here or 2 from Twitter that I can read. Let's see. So I think it's Neil Ulrich, apologize if I pronounced your name wrong, from Twitter on the hashtag medics, asks, what is the rationale by companies behind locking up all this data from the patient, device data from the patient? I have my theories personally. I'm sure you guys have your theories. I think the easy thing, to me, there's two quip responses I hear often in healthcare because my professional life is in healthcare. I hear HIPAA and FDA as the answer for everything. We can't do social media because of HIPAA. We can't do XYZ because of HIPAA. We can't do XYZ because of the FDA will stop us. And because I've talked with the FDA personally, they've come up to me and said, don't do that. Until somebody comes up and says, don't do that, I feel like you really shouldn't use that as a blanket excuse. But I was also intrigued this morning. Carly was on this panel with Fred Trotter, and they were talking about this idea of data being dangerous. And we were having a discussion about who is the data dangerous to? Is it dangerous to the healthcare provider by feeling like they're being replaced by a computer? Because honestly, I go into my doctor every 3 months and he gives me my lab work and I leave. I went and showed him DIYPS and I showed him how my outcomes had changed and he was like, that's cool. Like, hello, this is amazing. This is saving my life, and he was just kind of like, okay, that's great. Didn't really care. So I think, it's interesting to think that companies feel like this data might be dangerous. FDA thinks that this might be dangerous to the patients. But I look at this and say, in our case, my specific thing that I'm the only person using this, yes, it's making recommendations for me to pay attention to. But if you strip away the recommendations and it just says, hey, you're high, pay attention. Hey, you're low, pay attention. It's basically a secondary display. You have it in your pocket. What's wrong with seeing it on your phone screen? It's going to make it safer for patients to use this device to be able to see it in more places, to let the parents, the school teacher, the school nurse, a loved one, a friend, whoever it is in your life be able to look at that. So I guess I don't know what the rationale is other than risk mitigation, but I think we're at the point where we're really turning the dynamic to say, okay, where is the risk? And if the patient is willing to take it on and say, I accept the risk of seeing my CGM data on a second device, that I can do that and not be, have the FDA come after me. But that's my take, and I would love to hear what you guys think about, why the device data is so restricted.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard HIPAA and FDA. FDA gets tossed around a lot, but the best answer I've ever gotten is that these companies are afraid of the dark, and that this is all sort of uncharted territory, and that as much as certain parts of the company are probably seeing the benefits of being an early adopter of these types of things, you can imagine a bunch of people sitting around a boardroom and half the table saying, we need to get on this, and the other half saying, regulatory is going to be a problem. This is going to slow us down. We're putting ourselves at risk. We're going to get sued. And so there's probably internal battles going on, and they're waiting for everyone else to move first. And then I do think the first movers are going to have huge advantage. But, in the end, it's a business decision for them, and that most of them are hardware companies that make money on the devices and the supplies. And so the software has always been an add-on that's that's given away for free. And it's also just, they have it now, so why would they give it away? It's just, I think, very basic thinking on their part.
I mean, so that's interesting that you said that about HIPAA and FDA, because when I heard that, that's what I thought, probably just for privacy reasons. Because, I mean, you can imagine that if something did go wrong with patient data, that could turn out to be a complete nightmare. I mean, it could ruin someone's life. I don't know how. Maybe I'm just thinking about it from that standpoint that I shouldn't be. Just, I'm afraid of the dark. Let's not go there. So, I mean, I'm not sure. I do think a lot of it is a business decision, like Doug said. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why they do that.
And I feel like there's enough of us saying, well, given I just feel like a lot of these decisions were made about locking down the data and the software and the way they approach the FDA, 10 or 15 years ago, when the technology wasn't evolving at the rapid pace that it is now. And this kind of goes in the next question from Mikhail. He says, people have been hacking devices for decades. Any views on why this movement will be different this time? And my fervent hope is that it will be different. I think it has to be. And I think, what we're all doing is a perfect example of, if you told me 2 years ago that I would be able to, show my CGM data to, a loved one 20 miles or, 200 miles away, I would have said, you're crazy. There's no way that you can get the device off in real time, or that I'm going to be able to carry it around, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like the computers going from huge monsters all the way down to the little computers we have in our pockets and the computers that we have that are medical devices. Just the evolution is startling. And the fact that just everyday technology is able to, come together and essentially become a series of algorithms is now a class 3 medical device. That's just astonishing to me. So I think the fact that technology has evolved is my perspective of partially why this is going to be so different, but also because we have hundreds and thousands of people. You guys in the room are a perfect example of this. This conference is a great example of us saying, we're not waiting. This is not good enough anymore. We're going to change the way our healthcare industry and our healthcare environment is. I think that's really powerful. It's just we're saying enough is enough. We have to do something. Like it's not good enough anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it already is happening. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. What's going on with Night Scout, and so one of the threads that's been picked up is GitHub a distribution channel? This is one of the things that the FDA has picked up on, and they haven't really answered that, have they? I think they've essentially said, I mean, so there's a difference between posting code versus compiling it, putting it on a device, and either giving it away or selling it. But I mean, it just seems like the genie's out of the bottle on this one. But that's one of the most interesting things, I think, is that, and back to the earlier question, is that I think that a lot of the companies don't understand that actually the patients are not the enemy here. We actually want to build services on top of these devices. I mean, my Dexcom CGM, I love it, and I think it seems like you've grown,
very attached to mine.
Yeah, and so that we want to help them do better. I mean, I think probably demand for Dexcom has gone up as the CGM in the cloud thing has exploded and more people have learned about it. So I think that if they could view us that way, it's kind of one of these, rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've had conversations with my pump manufacturer who've done different patient advocate forums, and they've asked for our suggestions and our thought. And one of the big questions for me is if you put a temporary basal rate, so if you change the level of insulin that you normally get, there is no history anywhere on your pump that shows you if you did it when and how much, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. And I do that. I'll reduce my insulin level and ward off a low a lot of times. But then it said the insulin on board number that it gives me is wrong. That's just based on the bolus insulin I did. It doesn't say, well, you actually reduced your insulin, so your nut number is this. And I've totally changed my thinking around needing that number to make calculations. So if I reduce my insulin in an hour, the fact that I reduced it an hour ago actually matters. And so I've asked for years, can I get this basal history displayed on the screen? It's something we've been asking for. And it's like, well, we have to give up this memory space and that, and we have to go through the FDA, and it'll be on this software thing in maybe 5 years, have yet to see that improvement. That's a great example of, we've been asking to participate and it's not there yet. And the fact that you were, asked to be involved, on a project like this, I'm just curious, kind of what your thoughts are on, why do you think that they did it, and how can we get other research groups and other institutions to ask patients to be involved at the level that you were involved in?
Right. So this is really fascinating because I'm still relatively new to this patient advisory, patient advocacy world, but listening to you talk about why doesn't this exist, in my mind, I'm thinking, does it really not exist? I mean,
yeah.
And so being asked to serve as a patient advisor and being involved to the capacity that I am, I thought that was normal because in my mind as a patient, for example, if we're making a device to help patients, why aren't patients helping design it?
Yeah.
That just seems like it should make sense. Right. And so, and in my mini rant, I forgot what the question was. Can you repeat it?
I'm just, what mindset do you think they had approaching you to be involved, and how can we get other groups to be as awesome as your group is?
I mean, I think our researchers really just recognize the fact that, well, first of all, going around the idea of a post-discharge problem, I think really did contribute because doctors really don't know what patients face when they go home. But on top of that, I think it's just they're one of the people who realize that, yeah, we're making something for patients. Maybe patients should help contribute and design it. And I think that, yeah, it's really amazing that isn't the norm. And I'm realizing that it's not the norm, and I'm still shocked every time I hear, like, oh, really, that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Why? And so I do think that there's a lot of change going on. For example, PCORI is really pushing for that. And that's why I bring up the checklist thing with more funding towards having a patient-centered team or project. I think a lot of researchers do the whole, oh, look, our patient, check, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing because I think researchers will then really realize that, oh, wow, this patient does have a good perspective they are contributing, that we can learn from them. And the flip side to that is, though, if a patient feels like they are just a check on a list, they're not going to contribute as much. So it's hard. But I think just as more researchers, more medical device companies realize that by involving patients, you can actually make something really useful for patients and something that patients will actually want to use and want to engage in. I think that's just really the only way you can start.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is with the dynamic of the fact that patients are out there innovating first before the research teams. I'll be curious to see, Joyce Lee is a great example. When she saw DIYPS, she came up and said, can we do a study? How can we help? How can we get this out there? And I love the idea of instead of patients being the checklist, but that, research teams can look out there instead of trying to recreate the wheel and do it themselves. They say, here's this great project. How can we go support that to take it to the next level? So kind of flipping that dynamic of instead of us being the checklist, kind of them being the checklist of saying, hey, who out there wants to come and, help us take it to the next level? So that'd be really cool. And Sarah, I know you had a question. I don't know if we can take the mic up to you. And thank you to our wonderful volunteer mic runner.
Hi, Sarah from Sweden. And of course, being from Sweden, I don't know too much about the U.S. healthcare system, and we couldn't do this in Sweden either for the time being. But I want to ask you a question, sort of flipping the business models in this area. So what do the three of you think if you were to turn your CGMs into consumer products instead, that you would pay for them yourselves? What would happen with the data and the dynamics in this field?
That's a great question. So what happens if we flip this and make it a consumer device? And that's actually something I hear from a lot of people. They're like, man, I'm so jealous that you can track your data, which is a little bit annoying on one level as a person with a chronic illness that could kill me overnight. It's a little bit hard to hear that, but I hear what they're saying is, I would love to be able to get that level of data. And there is actually a company that used to work on the medical side that's going out and trying to make a consumer product that does the same thing. So how can we solve a lot of the problems that patient with diabetes face with the calibration time and the startup and the inaccuracy, and you just want to see the trend level. So there's actually a company out there doing it, and I'm fascinated to see what they're learning in their experience, and the consumerization of that version of it will feed back benefits into our CGM. I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's just one example that comes to mind is people are trying to do that.
So what do you think would happen to the consumer and the customer? Sort of, you would be the customer then in that case. What would happen to the dynamic with your doctor as well?
Well, I think we are people with diabetes are often lucky and unlucky because sometimes we have to ask for this technology. It's not you have diabetes, you get a CGM. We're very privileged to be able to have the access to it, to be able to continually buy the sensors and the equipment. So in some cases that we are the consumer, and that's why it is a little bit frustrating in the current state of not having access to the data and for the software being so horrible when you are paying a lot of money out of pocket in most cases for this device. And I don't know how detailed I went, but I didn't have the Windows computer with that version of software. I stole my boyfriend's, now fiance's, computer every time he came down to see me and to plug it in and to get my data, but I had no access to my data because it was on this version of software that was so clunky. So we're kind of in this weird model where we're consumers, but we're not. So I'm hoping that the true consumerization of making it a non-prescription device and that everybody can kind of see their glucose trends if they really want to put this thing on will translate back to the CGM companies saying, well, okay, with the outside companies doing it, okay, fine, we'll do it. But I don't know if that's going to be the trigger to make them think, okay, yeah, you're consumers, you're opting into buying their product. I still think they think of us as people who have to have it versus choosing to go above and beyond, in a lot of cases paying a lot of money to be able to access this. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think the business model is still pretty tricky, actually. Even though there's 28 million diabetics in the U.S., there's only 2 million. I see numbers anywhere between 1.5 and 3. I'm not sure how many you estimated at, but so 5 to 10% are type 1s, and then you get into the actual numbers on devices. It's about 650,000 on pumps, from what I've heard, and about 200,000 on CGMs. So that's not a big market. So as a business, it's a huge challenge. Obviously, to build out all the software to get the regulatory clearance, that takes a lot of money. So it's still unclear. I think there's companies like Sweet Spot, who was acquired by Dexcom, who try to do a consumer business model and have people pay, and the reaction was pretty negative. Patients already feel like we're paying so much for our healthcare coverage, the devices themselves, all this other stuff we don't want to pay on top. In theory, I think a lot of the insurance companies are willing to pay if you can prove improved outcomes, but to get there takes years, and that doesn't seem to be viable in the short term. So there's a lot of people who are, doing this just because they're patients themselves and they're interested in it, and it's still unclear.
But it doesn't really take years to get the data, as we saw from Dana's numbers, actually. So if you have access to the data, you can actually prove the outcomes increase in very short time. But for regulatory aspects, yes, I see your point.
I mean, I think a big insurer is going to want to see a lot more data than that.
It's an interesting point, though, because part of the reason this is viewed as a Class 3 medical device is it's saying things based on continuous glucose monitoring data point. And right now, no CGM company has proved to the FDA's satisfaction that you can dose insulin on a CGM. So technically, I'm not supposed to do anything unless I whip out my meter and test my blood sugar, because the CGM single data point, according to the FDA, is less accurate. The beauty of the CGM, though, is that you're not looking at a single data point. You're looking at a number of data points and trends. So that's what many people with diabetes might choose to take action on. It's not FDA approved. Do everything at your own risk. Follow your doctor, all that kind of stuff. But the FDA looks at that and says, you can't take that data point and dose based on that. So the algorithms are really looking at the trends. But it's crazy. But that's something that N of 1, we two individuals or three or whoever's doing this are not going to be able to prove to the FDA that you can dose based on that. It's going to have to be the CGM company. So that's kind of a battle we can't fight right now.
I'm going to try to say.
Okay, and the mic will be coming down to you in a second.
Okay, so I'm going to try not to be wordy, but I have so many questions running through my head. First off is, what triggered the FDA to become aware of you, essentially?
Good question. We were at a innovation conference that they were also there, and we happened to be talking about it, and they made a beeline over and said, well, hello there, and had that conversation with us.
Didn't know that you should not say something?
No. We knew they were there, and we wanted to talk to them, so it was actually a great opportunity.
Oh.
So I'm kind of joking. I actually really appreciate them saying, this is a Class 3 medical device. Don't post it online, because we were talking about posting it open source so that people could take it and innovate further. So it was helpful to know that in advance.
But then what happened? It got classified as...
Well, classification, they just
3.
told us if we had posted online and distributed it, and then it had come to their attention, they would have viewed that as somebody creating and marketing and distributing a Class 3 medical device.
A rogue patient.
Right.
Okay.
And so I can do whatever I want to my own body.
Okay.
And a doctor can talk to their patients about whatever they want to do. But if I start saying, hey, Doug, you should do this. Here's the code. Give me $2. That's marketing, distributing.
What if you just don't get the $2 part?
It doesn't matter. According to them, hey, you should use this. It's great. Do it for yourself. That's the no-no.
Okay. Thank you for
think
clarifying.
Yeah.
The general thinking is that if you're pulling data from a Class 3 device, you're now Class 3. And
if you're what?
If you're pulling whatever class of device you're pulling from, you're now that class of device. So if you're pulling
CGM.
from a Class 2 device, you're now Class 2. And if you're pulling from Class 3, you're now Class 3.
I have no idea what you just said. I'm sorry.
There's levels of regulation.
I know. I'm sitting here shocked because, there's a multi-district litigation with 100,000 injured patients by polypropylene mesh. And we can't even get that device, which has obvious poor outcomes and life-changing, altering, profound quality of life changes, classified to classify it to risk level 3.
Interesting.
So that just blew my mind that you made something that helped and they made it Class 3 when, anyway.
They didn't actually classify anything. They told us if you were to go
and do that
process, it would probably
this is what we would do. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for clarifying that. And then my second question is, there's been so much about self-monitoring, primarily focused on diabetes, because
we've got the
naturally
data.
lends itself to that. So I found out in May for the first time when I had to go to the emergency room that I am hypoglycemic. It's not related to diabetes. I don't have diabetes. I have hypoglycemia. And my mom has it. So I guess there's some genetic component, but so a glucose monitoring, continuous glucose monitoring would be awesome for me too, but I don't know how to get care by a doctor because they can't sell me insulin. The insurance company can't sell me. There's nothing to sell me to make myself better because it's the lack. I mean, I have too much of what,
Right.
So I have the same fears as you do. And since I just found out in like May, ended up in the emergency room with a blood glucose that wasn't registering at all and almost in a coma. How do you, let me see how to word the question. That condition is not really considered a real condition because in my mind, because there isn't a pill for it. It's just sort of a syndrome. It's enigmatic, and they're like, well, just eat better. And I can't gather the points of data that you gather other than blood sugar about what really changes it, except by this very long process of elimination of this food and that food and the frustration of being surprised by a day where I cannot get above 70 for no reason. And I've been doing all the things that I thought I discovered last week were going to keep my blood sugar up. So as a diabetic, thinking kind of like a diabetic, help.
Yeah. I would say talk to your
patient
healthcare
advocate,
team.
and now I'm a patient.
Yeah. It's hard to make that switch, I can imagine, but I would say talk to your doctor. And they've got continuous glucose monitors that they have like medical pro versions where they'll put it on you for a week and come back and they'll look at the data and they'll be like, aha, eureka, and whatever the doctors
keeps telling me I'm normal. Because the range I've been given 3 different ranges of normal by 3 different physicians. So I don't know what's normal. I just know that if I'm at 70 or 60, I'm a bear. I'm grumpy. I'm mean.
No comments on what I'm like when I'm low.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But that's how I am all the time. And it's a struggle for me to keep it up high enough to have any energy to do what I need to do. And it takes me by surprise. So is it an endocrinologist? Because I find that when I go to the doctor, they find it's an acute issue like reactive hypoglycemia, not.
I know we have at least one endocrinologist and somebody else raising their hand who might have a suggestion, but we've got like 2 more minutes left. So let's get an answer for her and then maybe go to a next question. Did you have an answer or a question? Great. So I think the answer is let's talk offline about this further.
I'm really, really excited by this panel, by the way. It's like I'm a kid in the candy store as an ePatient. So I come from problems in a slightly different way. I'm representing women who carry BRCA mutations, and I'm trying to understand decision-making and risk. And so what I see is that you guys have kind of banded together and you've built these devices. Have you started like putting out do you have any resources as you go to help somebody else in a different community to learn about the rules that you're kind of getting or the hurdles that you're trying to get over with the FDA and like just rules of the road?
That's a really good question. So I've only been thinking about it for DIYPS and my N of 1, but also our 2-person kind of thing. We've been blogging and posting as we go along about what our experience has been. So specifically for DIYPS, go to DIYPS.org. That's where we've kind of been chronicling our experience, but I haven't been doing it in terms of what can other people take from this and learn from it. But if there's anything in particular that you've heard, you're like, I have these questions, can you write about this? I can definitely share what our experience has been. I don't know if you guys have been posting about your experience and where that would be that they could find.
I know nothing about the mystery that is the FDA, so I'm sorry.
One of the things the FDA is always trying to stress, and they're at these same conferences that we go to, is that they are approachable. And there's one woman that I emailed, and she sent me a PDF that explained the whole process. And they actually are, one of the things they highlight is that by law they're required to respond to you within 90 days if you make a formal request to talk to them. And there's different types of requests that you can make in terms of what you want that meeting to be. It can be in person. It can be over Skype. I think they can do it over you can
request back by writing.
So within the FDA site somewhere, or I guess I could post the PDF that she linked me to. It's a little complicated, but they're trying.
Yeah.
And that's a really great point. And just a great example of DIYPS, my blood sugar is dropping. He saw it and threw me a juice box. So great example right there.
Should we end on that?
But yeah, so the FDA is actually having several conversations with us proactively where we said, hey, here's this kind of thing. When is it a secondary display? When is it class 3? What would this be? What would that be? And they're able to have a conversation. So that's definitely something that we can talk to offline about what that process has been. But I want to be respectful of the next panel coming up. You guys are on, but if you have further questions, please tweet to the hashtag MedX. Our Twitter handles are there, and we're going to be floating around and at the reception tonight, so we'd love to talk to you more. So thank you guys for your participation today, and thank you guys for participating.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.